Hey, welcome. I see one person's here. Awesome. Glad to have you joining us. Oh, hi, Pam. Good to see you. So, while people are kind of trickling in, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the materials that I'm using today. The only really required materials that you've got to have for this are paper and a pencil. But colored pencils are definitely helpful to have, any kind of colored pencils. But I'm just going to go over a few of my favorite tools that I like to use for drawing. So just for the outline, we're going to start with a regular old, like number 2 HB pencil. Or if you have Derwent drawing pencils, those are really nice too. They come in a few different like lead softnesses. Those are really good. If you have drawing pencils, I would use one of the lighter ones. And for colored pencils, I really like Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils. I have a full set of these got, but I will be talking about a few of my favorite colors throughout this class. So a few other tools that are helpful, you're definitely going to want a pencil that has a good eraser. I like to erase a lot. Another thing I like to have is just a little soft brush of some kind, so you can brush eraser crumbs off of your paper. That way you're not smudging things. And a pencil sharpener. This one is made by Faber-Castell. It's really nice. It has a few different sizes, so I usually use this size right here. But for some of the bigger Caran d'Ache pencils, this big size is nice to have too. Pam, could you just confirm that you're able to see me and hear me in the comments? That would be awesome if you could do that. This is my first time using Facebook Live, I'll admit, so I just want to make sure everything is working. Hopefully it is, because I don't see any comments yet, but I will keep talking about some tools. This is another thing I really like to have. It's called an electric eraser. So it actually erases colored pencil really nicely. It won't always erase it fully, like if it's a really dark color like black or dark blue. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Cassidy. Is it bright enough? The screen looks nice and bright. I have a bunch of lights here, so. Hopefully. But this electric eraser just has this really little button here. And you have to kind of hold it at an angle when you're erasing. Make sure that the eraser doesn't fall out, because it does kind of fall out on its own. But I'll talk about some techniques for that. Some other kinds of colored pencils that I really like are the Caran d'Ache Luminance colored pencils. Oh, great. Thank you, Cassidy. So these are kind of to like pastels. They will really like lay on the color pretty thickly. So I have a white one and a black one. I actually like to use this one a lot for burnishing, which is a method of blending colors. And another brand that's one of my favorites is the Derwent colored pencils. I really like Derwent Studio colored pencils. I have a few different colors of Derwent. That Copper Beech is one of my favorites, and the nice thing about them is that they take forever to sharpen down, and I sharpen my pencils a lot, so that is a really nice feature of them. Prismacolor colored pencils are another really nice option. They're a little bit more affordable than some of the other brands. But for someone who draws a lot like me, it's actually less affordable because they sharpen down really quickly. So I'm finding myself having to replace them a lot. So if I were to pick one favorite brand, it would be the Faber-Castell Polychromos for sure. Oh, Joyce, you can't get on? I'm not sure why that is, because other people are on here. Could one other person just confirm that you can see and hear me? I've never used Facebook Live, so this is totally new to me. Oh, perfect. Great, Joyce. All right. So those are just the basic supplies. I also like to have good lighting. So I just have like a basic desk lamp so that I can see really nicely. And this paper that I'm using is called bristle paper. So it's Strathmore bristle vellum paper, which is a really nice paper to use because it's a little bit thicker than some of the other kinds of art paper. And it's very smooth too, which is nice because you won't get like the white spots that you'll get in some of the other kinds of paper. So if you do have your photo of the pine warbler, you can go ahead and either pull that up on a second device or take out your printout. But if you weren't able to get a hold of that on another device or something like that, you can just follow along too. So you can take out your regular pencil. That's all we're going to need for this first part. So I'm probably going to be on for about an hour or so, just so you guys are aware. So the very first thing I'm going to do is start freehanding the outline. So we're just going to do very basic geometric shapes for this part. So for the head, we basically do an oval. I'm going to start with the head. You could also start with the body if you want. That's also going to be an oval. But another thing I like to do is measure. So if you have that picture handy, you can measure about how long the head is and about how wide it is. So when I say measure, I mean basically you take the point of your pencil and put it like at the top of the head like this on your photo, and then take your fingers like this and just measure a marker where the throat of the bird would be. Hopefully that makes sense. And then you make a mark on your paper for the bottom of the head and the top of the head, just like that. Okay, and then you're going to draw an oval. See how long the head is. And I am pre-measuring just for the sake of time, but I would definitely recommend, just to get in the habit of trying to draw, just guesstimate the size of the head before you do that. And then if you're a little bit too big or too small, you can make adjustments afterwards. That way you're just getting in the habit of trying to figure it out, kind of guesstimate it. Especially helpful for someone who's interested in drawing birds in the field, because you're not going to be able to measure them in the field. So for the bill, I'm doing the same thing, looking at the proportions. And for the bill, you also want to pay close attention to where it's positioned on the head. So try not to put it too high up or too low down, which all of these things really take practice. So you have this part that comes off the front here, and then you also have this kind of shape coming in where the mouth is, and then a line dividing the upper and lower bill like that. And then we have a little nostril like that. It's just kind of a triangle. Next, we can add in the body. So the body is going to be just slightly down from the head like this. And you want to look at the approximate angle of the body as well. So, you know, if the bird's about to take off, it's going to be leaning forward a little bit more. This bird is sitting up pretty straight, so this is a pine warbler. Those who maybe got on a little bit late. So this photo was taken at Kiptopeke State Park, which is the place where I used to work. And I'm really lucky to have a friend who's a photographer who took this photo and is letting me use it for this class, because I always want to get permission to use photos when I'm drawing. So then, of course, you don't want the head to just be floating in the air, so we're going to draw some lines to connect the head and the body like this for the neck. And you'll also want to measure how wide the body is if you can. And if you don't have the photo handy, another good way to look at proportions is think about how many heads long is this body here. So just on mine, let's take a look. It's really a little bit more than 2. And that's another useful thing to do, like if you're out in the field too, to help you with proportions. Next, we'll add on the tail. So that comes off the end of the back in a fairly straight line. And they have a pretty skinny tail. This guy was on the Hawkwatch platform at Kiptopeke and he was catching insects. I actually remember this day when I saw this bird. And as you go, you can kind of erase like some of your guiding lines as well. Eraser crumbs bother me, so I'm getting rid of them. So yeah, people who just came on, I like to have a soft brush like this to get rid of eraser crumbs. That way it doesn't smudge your pencil lines. And then you have this little area here, the undertail coverts, connecting that. Next we'll do the wings. So the wing actually droops a little bit below the tail. So when you're measuring, you can also measure negative spaces. So those are the spaces in between shapes. So let's see, I measured on my photo that the wingtip is this far below the tail. So it's a pretty droopy wing. And the wing is this long. So we're going to go out to here. And it's kind of like a teardrop shape. You've got this pointed area, which is the primary feathers. So these are the outer feathers on the outer part of the wing. And then where it kind of comes up like this, these are the secondary feathers on the inner part of the wing. And then we can also outline where the back feathers come down, which is kind of like a little triangle area. Also, while we're drawing, if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them to the comments. I made this guy a little hunchbacked, so I'm going to fix that. So next, Before we get to the feather groups on the wing, let's add the legs in. So for the legs, I would recommend measuring how far they are away from basically the end of the tail. So measure from the tip of the tail to where the legs are, if you can. So it's right about here. Actually, more like here. So the interesting thing about bird legs is actually the part that you're seeing is just basically below the ankle. So the knee of the bird is up underneath the feathers. You can't see it at all. And they have this little part that comes down like this that is feathered. The next thing I like to do, actually, since he is perched on a flat surface, is just measure from here down to where he's perched. And you can draw a little line. Just a straight line. So, when you're drawing the legs, try to eyeball the approximate angle of the leg. And then the only toe that we can see really well is the back toe, which is also known as the hallux. So if you have the picture handy, you can measure the length of that. And he also has pretty long claws on there too. So this is the end of his toe. That's the end of his claw. And I'm drawing a little bit darker than I normally would, just so that you guys can see. So normally I like to draw pretty light just so that if I need to erase, it's not as tricky to do. So the thing that's helpful too that I should have mentioned before is you want to think about fitting the bird on your paper. So I sized my picture, it's on my computer screen right now, so that it would fit nicely on the paper. And I like to fill the paper, you know, pretty well. You don't want your bird to be too small on the paper, so that you can really add details in there. And that's why I like to start, oftentimes, you know, start at the top and work my way down. So I can start up in that corner and make sure I have plenty of space. So now I'm drawing the second leg here. Then you can see that hallux or that back toe comes out like this. Okay. Well, it's good to just take a look, and sometimes I'll double check certain measurements and things. If something looks a little bit off, I will adjust it. So on mine, I want to kind of define where the throat is and where the belly starts. There, that's a little bit better. So double checking your measurements is a nice thing to do. Sometimes I'll also actually trace using a piece of clear paper and the printed out photo. I don't like to do that for the final drawing. It's kind of personal preference. Some people do trace, but I like to freehand just because you learn more about the anatomy of the bird that way. At least for me personally. But tracing is a good exercise because it like helps your muscle memory. It just helps you get in the habit of, okay, so this is where different parts are located and the size and the proportions and things like that. Can also add a little bit of texture. He's got a little belly floof, comes up like that. So now let's add the eye as well. So it's really important to pay attention to placement with the eye. So one thing that can help sometimes is if you draw like a straight line out from the top of the beak like that, and make sure the eye is level with that. And you can measure from the mouth line to where the front of the eye is going to be. You can also measure how far down the eye is from the top of the head. And then the size of it too. And then just add a circle. Just like that. And he's got this little marking here between the bill and the eye as well. Want to add that in. And if your bird has markings like this pine warbler does, you know, he's got kind of a more yellow belly than his olivey sort of back and sides. You can put in kind of a delineation for that too. Add some of this floof here. All right. Now we can add in the different feather groups. So this triangle here, just the back feathers. Erase this guiding line. But now we're going to add in the coverts. So if you have your photo handy, you'll see that there are sort of two basic lines of smaller feathers. So the upper layer there is what's called the median coverts. So we're going to add those in. And they come out to about here. But I'm not going to draw every individual feather yet. I'm just going to put a line that outlines that group of feathers, basically like this. Then the next line down, we have what's called the secondary coverts, also known as the greater coverts. And again, I'm just outlining that group of feathers. We have one kind of larger feather here that's known as the alula. Cool fact about the alula, this feather actually, when a bird is landing, it acts like the brakes to help create a little drag so the bird has a smooth landing. It's sort of like how airplane wings have flaps on them. And then you can see there's this little triangle of feathers underneath that. Those are the primary coverts. So primary coverts are above the primaries, secondary coverts are above the secondaries. So for this part, it's a little bit tricky to see the delineation, but these sort of stacked feathers that are shorter here are the secondaries up here. And then we have the primaries down here that stick out and kind of come to a point. And then we can also see the other wing a little bit on the other side of the bird. So it sort of comes up over his back like this. And we have the upper tail coverts, these feathers on the upper side of the tail. So you can measure about how far out those come. They're like the greenish yellow feathers, but then you have these long tail feathers, also known as the rectrices. All right. Oh, hi, Pam. Hi, Brianna. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to add them to the comments if you think of any. I'm just going to reshape the head a little bit here. So when you're drawing a bird, it's important to look at the head shape. Warblers have a pretty rounded head. And then it sort of comes down like that. And then dips down. And then back out like that. And I also noticed, let's double check the width here. My wing comes down a little bit more than how I drew it, so I'm gonna adjust that a bit. All right, that looks a little bit better. Awesome. Okay, so that is the basic outline of my pine warbler. I might make some more adjustments later, but next, why don't we start, since I'm pretty happy with how the head looks, why don't we start on the eye? So if you do have colored pencils, the ones that I would want to use for the eye are some different shades of brown. So if you have kind of like a brown that looks like this is Derwent Copper Beach. I really like to use this one. So in the photo, the eye basically looks black. But we want the bird to definitely look like it has some life to the eye, you know, because if you were to see this bird in real life, the eye probably wouldn't look quite as dark as it does in the photo. So a color like this is nice to have, just sort of like a burnt sienna type brown, sort of bright. And then for the pupil, a black. So I'll just show you. This is also a really nice tool to have. This is a pencil holder. So when my pencils get really tiny so that you can barely hold them anymore, this is a really nice thing to have. Because I like to make sure I use the entire pencil up. Don't want to waste anything. And then you'll also want a darker, like a really dark brown. So this, if you want to get Faber-Castell Polychromos in individual colors, you don't want to get a whole set, I would say definitely get this dark sepia. Dark sepia is a really nice color. It's kind of neutral. It's like a very, very dark brown. It's kind of grayish too. And then also, I really like to use dark indigo. So for dark black areas, it's nice to use a very dark blue as like your first layer underneath of the black. That way it helps to give some depth to the pupil. So when you're drawing things that are black, you don't really want to just draw only black. It's good to have some blues and maybe some browns underneath of that, because it'll make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So the first thing you want to do is erase the outline of your eye till you can barely see it. I wonder too, I'm going to try something here. See if this works. Sorry, I've never used Facebook Live. I'm going to try to zoom in. Oh, it looks like it's working. It would also be really nice if they had a test feature for this. Like, you know how Zoom has a test feature? I've been using Zoom a lot for stuff. I bet a lot of you have. With the coronavirus and everything. But yeah, could somebody just let me know, does that look like it is focused? Someone please let me know in the comments. Focused and bright. I'll start to draw, if that helps you to be able to tell. It looks focused to me. Thank you, Joyce. Awesome. So I'm just going to do the outline of the eye using my dark sepia. And if you don't have these exact kind of colored pencils, of course, that's totally fine. A good equivalent would be really just any very dark brown. Like dark, there's some other ones. Dark umber, I think, in the Prismacolor range. Dark umber would be a really good one to use for this if you have Prismacolors. So next, I'm going to use my lighter brown, this Copper Beach, and just shade in that eye. But this is important. Even though you can't see it in the photo, I'm going to leave well, you can barely see a little bit, a hint of the light hitting the eye. But I'm going to leave just a little glint of light at the top of the eye where you don't put down any color. Because that will really help the bird to look alive. And you can fill in the whole entire thing except for that one little glint right here. Okay. And next, I'm going to take that dark indigo, or if you have any kind of like really dark blue, and I'm going to add in the pupil. And you'll notice I like to have my pencils really sharp, especially for small details like the eye. And that, for a lot of things, is kind of personal preference. There are some amazing colored pencil artists who do not keep their pencils this sharp. And I've been trying to not always keep them this sharp for some things because, you know, if you sharpen them less, it saves them for longer. But these polychromos are amazing. They last a really long time, which is really nice. That's why I said, you know, it's nice to have them if you do a lot of drawing, because it takes forever before you have to get a new one. It's awesome. Yeah, so that's basically the pupil. Hope you can see that nicely. It looks pretty good on my screen. And then you can take your dark sepia again, and just shade in around the edges. So think about shading the eyeball, you know, like it's a ball. So the top of it, actually, especially, you're going to have some dark areas up there. And then around the sides. The next thing I like to do is take a lighter color. So I'm going to use, I use this one a lot. This Luminance, it's just a white Luminance pencil. And I'm going to burnish it. So blend the two browns together, kind of. And that, of course, is going to make it look lighter. But then once I burnish it, I go over the top of it again with a dark brown. So the reason I do that is to blend it, and then also to try and get rid of any white spots in the paper. So that's especially important if you're using something that has like more tooth to it, like pastel matte or something like that. But luckily this type of paper, this bristle paper, is pretty smooth. And then I'm going to add, so I have a variety of different grays here. It's really nice to have a variety of grays. So Prismacolors have a bunch of different grays, and so do, you know, really any brand of colored pencils. But there are warm grays and there are cool grays. So, and they have different numbers. So for the Polychromos, it's numbers 1 through 6. And the higher the number is, the darker it's going to be. So I'm going to use kind of a mid-range warm gray for the edges of that glint on the eye. Just around the edges like that. And these lighter warm grays are also really nice ones for the burnishing as well. All right. Any questions about the eye? Alrighty. Next, let's get into just some of the areas around the eye. So again, when I'm adding colored pencils to areas, like I did with the eye, I'm going to erase these graphite guiding lines until I can barely see them. Like I can still see them a little bit, but not enough that it's going to come through. Because you don't want graphite in the final image of your drawing. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, for a bird like this, I have basically all the different shades of yellow that I have in my set of Polychromos pencils. But I'm going to start with kind of, let's see, kind of a light to almost medium color. I'm going to use the light cadmium yellow. And I'm not going to do any details yet. I'm just going to do the base layer of yellow. Oh, I need to erase this more. Because it's yellow, it's really light. Make sure you really erase that graphite until you can barely see it. And I'm just going to put down this color, and I'm going to make sure I go in the direction of the feathers. That's important. So if you look at the direction of the feathers, these feathers on the head are really tiny. These are contour feathers, and they're very small. So they kind of come from around the eye and go like this. Up and curved a little bit. So when you're adding this color, you want to go in that kind of direction. So that goes for also when you're drawing fur or feathers. You want to try and stick to the direction that it's going. That'll help it to be very realistic. And then when you come below the eye, the feathers are going to go down like that and curved a little bit. And we are just doing the first layer, no details here. Just putting in that basic color. So layers are super important with colored pencils. You don't want to go straight to details. Basically what happens is you build up layer upon layer. In this kind of paper, you know, the bristle paper and most kinds of drawing paper or sketch paper can take a lot of layers of colored pencil, which is really nice. You know, you listen to some tutorials that artists do, and they'll have like 10 layers of colored pencil on their paper, which is pretty amazing. I usually don't do that many layers, but you know, oftentimes the more layers you do, the more detail you're going to have. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with this one little area. You know, some people will shade in the whole entire head with that base layer, but I like to do kind of little sections at a time. Now I'm going to take a slightly darker yellow. This is Naples yellow. And I'm going to put that over the top of this. Also, the nice thing is the more layers you have, the more you're going to cover up white spots, so the tooth of the paper. So you can see, if you have the photo handy, that he has this darker yellow line here. And then below that, oops, below that, there is a really dark line in between the eye and the bill. But again, we're going to use layers. A nice thing I like to do, so I have the photo pulled up on my computer, and I use what's called a Magnifier Tool. So I have this just in preview mode. So if you go to View, no, actually it's Tools, and then Show Magnifier. If you have that view. A lot of photo programs have something like that too. And you can really get a nice up-close view of the colors there. So what I would say is start with a dark gray. It's kind of a cool gray. So I'm going to use the cold gray 6. And that will be my base layer for this. Again, try to think about the direction of the feathers. And these are really tiny feathers, so they really just kind of look like fur, to be honest. I made my bill a little bit large, but we'll get to that later. And then you also have some dark feathers coming under here. But make sure you leave a little space for this yellow ring of feathers underneath the eye. The feathers that are around the eye of a bird are going to be really, really tiny. So the last thing we'll do is we'll add in the details of those little tiny feathers, but we're not quite to that point yet. And now we can go over the top of this with, let's see. I'm going to do a little dark sepia at the edges. So like the equivalent of that would be sort of any dark neutral brown that you might have in your pencil set. Oh, and I should also mention, if you're not using colored pencil, if you're just using a regular graphite pencil, for this part you would just be shading pretty dark in here. And it's a little bit lighter at the edges. And good to have your pencil really sharp for these textury bits here. I'm gonna zoom mine in. The nice thing about having it pulled up on the computer is you can zoom way in on your reference photo. And luckily this one is high quality, so it's not extremely pixely when I try to do that. And if you look closely here, there's actually some groups of feathers. You can even start to outline where they are. You can see like these darker edges of these little feather groups here, like that. And then finally, I'm going to come in with a black pencil here. For the center of this, this little marking, I'm going to put in some black. So it's good to not put in black until you're absolutely certain of where you want it to be, because it's hard to erase even if you have an electric eraser. So I usually spend quite a bit of time on this area because the feathers are so tiny that it takes a lot of detail. Before we move on with that though, let's go to the bill. So I'm going to erase the outline until I can barely see it again. I'm also going to make my bill a little bit thinner than I did originally, because it was starting to look kind of like a flycatcher bill. It needs to look like a Warbler bill, which is a little bit thinner. So I'm going to take light gray. Let's see. It's a pretty warm gray. So I'm going to take my Polychromos, a warm gray 3. And just very lightly add in the outline of this bill. So you want to do it pretty lightly so that if you decide that you want to erase, then you can. Although I should mention that regular erasers don't really work very well on colored pencil. They will a little bit, but for those who didn't see me mention it earlier, I have what's called an electric eraser. And it just has this button here. It's battery powered. And you can use that to erase. It's really cool. The only thing about it is the eraser will fall out. So you have to hold it in an angle, and I'll just demonstrate. It takes some practice. You can actually hold the button down before you start erasing, and that will kind of, the motion will hold it in a little. And then it just erases like that. So you can see that spot is even more erased right now. And then you can also get refills for it. So the only thing about these electric erasers is that the ends of them will get very quickly, will get pencil on them. So you want to be mindful of that, and if your end has a lot of pigment on there, you want to either flip it around or replace it. Because the last thing you want to do is start erasing and have pigment on there and smudge like a whole bunch of pigment and press it into your picture. I've done it before and it's not fun. So it just takes practice. I would recommend if you do get an electric eraser, just practice using it on like a random sheet of paper. Just scribble and then try erasing with it before you try doing it on an actual drawing. Alright, so let's add in the outline now. This is the outline of the mouth. And I'm going to have this lower part be a little bit thinner than I originally had it. Just like that. And then this is a nice light warm gray, so I'm just going to use this for my base layer here. And I'm using very light pressure. Especially when you get to the top of the bill, use really light pressure. You can have a little more pressure on this lower mandible here, because that part, of course, is in more shadow. So it's important, of course, I'm sure a lot of you know this if you have an art background, you always want to look at where the light is coming from. So in this case, it's coming from above. It's kind of coming from this way. So the lower part of the bill is in shadow. So now I can use a slightly darker, I'm going to stick with the warm gray still, because this kind of has like a browny tone to it, this bill. Just going to add in this line first, and keep paying attention to the shape as you go. So if you have your photo out, keep referring to that. And if you don't, just keep referring to this video. It's not going to be quite as exact in the drawing, but hopefully it's close. So again, I'm starting to notice that this top of this is kind of bulging out too much. I'm like really perfectionistic about getting the bill shape correct. And you don't have to be that way, but I can kind of be that way. Just so you guys know also, I'm wanting to do these tutorials hopefully like every weekend maybe, if weekends work as a good time for people. And then, you know, of course, if you can't make it, you can always watch it later too. That's the nice thing about the Facebook Live. So we will start with this little pine warbler here. And what I'm probably going to do is I'll work on sections, you know, like the eye and the bill in this area. And I will start, in a moment, I'm going to start showing you how to do this area here, the top of the head. And then if you want to work on it on your own time, in between, you can do like the rest of the head. And we'll move on to like the back and other areas after that. Just because if I did a tutorial for the whole entire thing, that would probably be a lot of hours. I don't know if you guys want to watch me on video for that long. So then the nostril I'm going to shade in. Not totally dark, but, you know, pretty dark pressure here. We'll come in later with the black as well. And then I'm going to add in some of the darker tones to this area too. So you'll notice there's a dark spot here, and then there's this lower line here. I'm actually going to take an even darker gray. It is nice also to mix warm and cool grays. This is actually a Payne's gray, which is sort of like an in-between gray. I like this one as well. It's a little bit more bluish. And then again, we can take a lighter color. I'm going to use the warm gray 3 and just sort of blend the whole thing. Blend the edges of these shadows together. And then, you know, if you say, oh, it's too blended, then you can come back in with the dark color and sort of fix that up. Which is the thing that can happen, especially with feathers, you know. The nice thing about colored pencils is they're really, really good for texture. But when it comes to the bill, it's pretty smooth, so I'll do a little bit more burnishing with the bill than I would with feathers. So next, this upper area. Oh, you know what? I also should mention, there's a little line around the mouth that's going to be lighter. So I'm going to erase that in. And if you don't have an electric eraser, that's fine. A normal eraser will work just fine for this part because you don't want to erase it all the way, just part of the way. So yeah, you can see just how long these things take. Like, I'm not taking quite as long as I would if I was doing like an actual commission, but I do take a while, so it would be kind of tricky to do tutorials for the entire thing. Hoping this format will work well though. So next I'm going to start shading in this area. I'll start with a lighter warm gray. And just put like this line here, leaving that light area just above the mouth line. And then another nice thing that can be nice to do is just add a hint of blue to the very upper part. Like barely any pressure. Because it is almost a little bit bluish up here at the top of the bell. And then again, you can take a light color and blend them together at the edges a little. Oh, my little brush thing fell on the ground. Just a second. So, the end of this is getting a little dirty. I'm going to flip it around. Another kind of eraser that's good for colored pencils, and you can have a little more control of it, is called a Tombow Eraser, which I have not tried, but a bunch of people, especially Bonnie Snowden, whose tutorials I absolutely love, I'd highly recommend them. She uses a Tombow a lot to add highlights to things, so I'm thinking of ordering one of those. And it's really similar to this kind of eraser. It's got a really small end on it, but it's not electric, and you can get them in smaller sizes, so you have a little more control of it. Alright. So I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to bring this part up a little. And add a few more dark spots. So for the really dark areas, now I'm going to come in with the warm gray 6. One thing that can be tricky, I know I have trouble with this, is you have to be bold sometimes about making the dark areas actually be dark. Because when you really have that contrast, it'll look more realistic that way. But it's okay to do it gradually. And then finally for the nostril, I'm going to use the black pencil. And there's a little bit of really dark feathers that come up here just above this point here. So now we can get back to working on some of the feathers around the bell. Alright, so we have this kind of olive color that's on the upper part of the head. So if you have a colored pencil that's sort of like in between brown and green, this is going to be a really nice one to use. So I'm using this, it's called Olive Green Yellowish. It's kind of a funny name. Olive Green Yellowish Polychromos. So I'm going to sort of outline where this yellow stripe is on the head like this. Go in the direction of the feathers, you know, whether that be up or down. Depending on what you're doing, you know, like for this part, I would go from the top of the feather down because you're wanting to sort of show that texture at the base of the feathers. And again, it's good to have your pencil really sharp for these textured areas. Then at the back of the eye, you have this sort of space in between those yellow. It's got like a yellow eye ring almost. It's like a broken yellow eye ring. Kind of dips down a bit here. And then the same thing on the bottom. And then again, you can take your sort of light bright yellow, fill that in. If you have some spaces that need to be filled in a little bit. All right, so we can add, you know, a few more little details using some of our darker colors like this warm gray 6 here. Just underneath the eye. And you know, birds do have these little things that are like whiskers. They're called rictal bristles. Kind of barely see that in the picture. There's these very light. I did that one too dark, so I'm going to erase it. Very, very light feathers. All right. So we'll just do a little bit more around the top of the head. Oh, first I should just mention, you know, when I'm doing these feather groups, there's like this feather here, here, here. It's kind of in a row. Okay, so you got like that nice little row right there. Oh, and I'm always finding things I missed. So around the edge of the eye, make this a little bit darker. This part a little bit darker too. Added a hint of this feather row that's right next to the eye. You know what? Regular eraser. Came down a little bit too far. I'm gonna make this yellow a little bit wider. And you can see some darker areas in there too. So I'm actually going to use a brown. So this is called raw umber. It's like a greeny brown. And put in some tiny little specks there just to hint at darker feathers. Because it's not like all the same color yellow here. You know, you've got some darker shadows and spots. And then, oh, here it is. There we go, not bad. Probably do some fixing up later, but so now I'm gonna just do, oh, it's already a little bit past 9. I'm just gonna show you a small area at the top of the head here. So then if you guys want to work on this a little bit on your own, you can. So again, I'm going to do my base layer. So for this I'm using light cadmium yellow, which is one of my lighter yellows, but it's also fairly bright. And I'm just going to color this whole thing in here, kind of up to the peak of the head. Then I'm going to use one of my warm grays, like a medium warm gray to dark one. I'll use the warm gray 5. And outline the top of the head like this. And then I'm going to come in again with my sort of olive color, the olive green yellowish. And I'm just going to start adding in texture. So this is kind of the next darkest color. So think about the direction of the feathers. We're going to go like, whoop, sweep them back like that. Got some accompaniment. I don't know if you guys can hear that. My dad's playing guitar. And next, I'm going to use dark Naples ochre, which is like in between basically a yellow and a brown. I'm going to add a little bit of texture with that. So there are sort of some brown tones in here. So next I'm going to take raw umber, this color brown. Add a little bit of that in. Finally, there are some of the really dark areas. I can use dark sepia for that, and you'll want your pencil to be very sharp for those darkest areas. And they're just kind of in spots, you can see. Just like that. If you see areas that need to be blended a little bit, you can do that. And then just go back over the top with some of your darker colors. And then finally, at the very top of the head, I'm actually going to go back in with the eraser and erase a little. Add some of the really light yellow up here. And then, you know, when you've erased something with an electric eraser, it kind of leaves a line, so it's nice to blend it with one of your lighter pencils. As you can see, this is one of my favorite blending pencils. I really like these Caran d'Ache Luminance for blending. The light colors like the white work really well for it. Bring a little more texture in there. There we go. Alright, I think I'm going to leave off there for now. But does anybody have any questions? Well, you guys can definitely continue working on the head. So like this area here, if you want to start working on this cheek area here, you certainly can as well, and down into here. So down into the neck area, the feathers are going to get a little bit larger. So I will definitely continue next class with talking a little bit about that. But certainly this whole cheek area is something you can work on. And then the throat is just going to be similar, but it's going to be a brighter, like lighter yellow without the olive over the top of it. And I'll get into that next week too. Okay. I would love to see your work, so if you'd like to share it with me, please feel free to send me a message, or if you think of any questions later, you certainly can message me or write a comment on the post for this event, or you know, I'm always happy to help out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this today. I hope it's a fun activity, especially for this time, and that you're staying safe and healthy and finding ways to have a little happiness and joy in your life. I know for me, drawing is definitely one of those things, and so is sharing this with people and teaching people. So I hope you have a great evening and a great rest of your weekend. You're welcome, Joyce. Bye.